And none of these ministers, like me, uh, are into just saying thoughts and prayers. That's interesting for a minister to have that position. We're upstreaming too, Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube. Make it plain. So we're gonna hear from them. And our brother now is gonna also talk about a project he's been involved in. We're gonna find out all about that. But first and foremost, we'll also get his thoughts on this shooting, and I'm gonna get him to help me take a few calls as we adjust for the breaking news. Although I really don't see the point in talking about this, because we're not gonna do nothing. Like Stevie Song said, you haven't done nothing. We're not gonna do nothing. It's gonna keep happening as long as there's this gun culture rooted in white supremacy that opposes a Second Amendment that is rooted in slavery. And y'all run around thinking you need a gun. This is not going to change. The Reverend Dr. Jeff Obafemi Carr joins us from where I grew up in Nashville, Tennessee. My brother, Hotep, good morning, man.
Hotep, brother Mark Massimella Thompson, man. Long time. How you been?
Yeah, it has been a minute, brother. I'll be down there next week.
You get some food or whatever you need. Food, coffee, beer, whatever you want, man. We got you.
All right, I'll be down there for a day or two. I'm supposed to be speaking at the Du Bois 150th birthday celebration at Fisk next Wednesday night, folks, in the Fisk Memorial Chapel. Yesterday was Frederick Douglass's 200. I'll give you all a little black history. 200th birthday of Frederick Douglass. Mm-hmm. Next week, 150th. What you see, Jeff, is this continuum. When Frederick Douglass was passing off the scene, he passed it to Du Bois, and when Du Bois passed it off the scene, he passed it to Dr. King. Du Bois passed away, y'all, literally, the night before the March on Washington, August 27, 1963.
Wow.
So you see this continuum, as Dr. John Henry Clark used to. You'll love that word, continuum. And yeah. You remember that? And how the baton is passed one to another. By the way, Jeff, Chadwick Boseman acknowledged Dr. John Henry Clark and Dr. Ben the other day in an interview, and how reading their work helped him prepare for Black Panther, brother.
Well, Chadwick Boseman, man, is a deep brother. A lot of people have seen him in the recent years. But I met Chadwick Boseman for the first time at the National Black Theater Festival back in the early 2000s. And the brother was there not just as an actor, but as a playwright. And he got put on the map in the theater community with a play called Hieroglyphic Graffiti. And it was a play that he wrote that retold the story of Asar and Aset in modern times in the hood in D.C.
What?
They brought the play to Tennessee and did it here on the campus of TSU. And that young man then, I said, this brother is deep.
Oh, yeah.
We had a chance to chat for a minute. He probably has no recollection of it. But he's always been steeped in the culture. Dr. Ben was one of my teachers, my personal teachers. Dr. Clark was one of my brothers, Dr. Greg Carr, his personal teacher. But I traveled to Kemet with Dr. Ben. I was initiated by Dr. Ben into the priesthood. And when you see this continuum connected there, when you see this tradition being handed down, you don't get as much of the depression that you get from people who are the naysayers and say that we cannot survive, we cannot grow, we cannot flow.
Right.
Dr. Clark said it best when he said all history is a current event. The first boy that tossed a stone into the ocean in Africa on the West Coast is still influencing the tide of the ocean to this day. So it's important that we understand that continuum, and that continuum is what keeps us functioning with a high frequency vibration and not being distracted by people who say we cannot thrive and we cannot win.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate that, brother. I didn't know that history. That's outstanding. Jeff Obafemi Carr joins us from Nashville. That's right. We need it. My brother, so let me get your reaction first of all to the shootings, the shooting of yesterday and all those events. How are you feeling about that this morning?
This has become a ritual in America that's become a dangerous dance. It is something that we struggle with, and people of color especially struggle with, as we try to frame our minds around it, because it's nothing new that we see this violence. People are aghast, and they're like, oh my gosh, their violence. My friends who would self-identify as white, they say this is just horrible. Hey, and we say, well, this is part of that continuum too. This is what we see. But see that if the culture of violence goes unchecked, then you're going to start seeing the only way that we see any kind of paradigm of trickle down from the Reagan era, and that is that it's going to trickle down into our children too. So what we're seeing is horrible. This is, I think, the 18th school shooting in 2018. What are we, 6 weeks into 2018?
Yeah.
If we don't start to move on things now, I think it's going to absolutely come down to what happens when the wrong white kid gets shot. And when it happens that way, then you'll see that people often act in self-interest. So if it happens in a rural setting, if it happens in a setting that's off the beaten path, that's one thing. Broward County, the details are still coming in, but when it starts happening in the elite private academies, where some of the lawmakers' children might be, I think then you're going to see people starting to say, we've got to do something. And they're going to start using the big T word that they're afraid to use when the person is not a Muslim or not from Africa.
Yeah. Or, and I've said this before, when the shooting happened in the movie theater in Aurora, I wrote a piece then about how the myth of black on black violence is even harmful to white people, and they don't realize it yet. So they focus so much on us and the violence in our communities, those who make that argument, black on black violence, which is really a misnomer, that they were ignoring, and to this day ignore, violence in their own community. So the perception is we are all the ones who are impoverished and on food stamps, not whites. So Trump says we're gonna cut food stamps. And people on food stamps who are white say, yeah, I'm for that. No, you on food stamps too, fool.
Right. Exactly.
And
you
with
realize
these
that you try to go get some.
Right. And then with the shootings.
Yeah.
So there are people today, with the help of Fox News, that can be in denial about what happened yesterday, because they've been convinced we're the only ones that are violent.
Well, that's the danger of trying to craft a narrative of black inferiority, black bestiality, the lack of humanity from black people, and refusing to see us as fellow spirits navigating the human experience. When you try to dehumanize somebody, even if you take it back to the 1500s and the Romanist Pontifex, which declared that we were all infidel people and gave, through the Catholic Church, the ability and the permission to Spain and Portugal to put us in slavery because they said we didn't have any souls. This has been a long continuum, a long narrative. And when you have that happen, then people, again, they get into a place where they vote against their self-interest. They basically put the gun to their own heads because they've been convinced that everything bad comes from us colored folk.
Right. No, you're absolutely right. Reverend Jeff Obafemi Carr is with us, folks. We're going to field some of your calls. Before I do that, though, we do want to mention that Jeff is actually scheduled here to talk about his film. Speaking of some of the violence and unfortunate events that happen in the black community, it's around pledging and hazing. Jeff, tell us. And my son's 15. He's now thinking about whether he wants to pledge when he goes to college.
Okay.
And he has a maternal uncle who's a Q. And I said, well, you got to pledge Alpha. And he said, why? I said, because my grandfather, your great grandfather, was a legendary Alpha, and he founded the Alpha chapter Tennessee State. So you got to go pledge Alpha. So he didn't know that. He said, what difference does it make? I said, well, that's your legacy. So, we had a little interesting conversation about that. But when it comes to pledging, you made this film a few years ago, and I think it's being renewed, and there's renewed interest, and I think you're re-releasing it. Help me with all that. But He Ain't Heavy. Tell us about that, if you would, Jeff.
He Ain't Heavy, Pledging Underground is, and I had no idea about this until somebody told me, but it's a piece of modern black history. It is actually the first found footage style African American directed and produced film, independent film. And He Ain't Heavy tells the story of 5 young college students, all African American, joining a black fraternity, and the intense initiation experiment that they go through that's captured on digital cameras, it's captured on cell phones, it's captured on surveillance equipment. And it's a window into reality that gives you an understanding of the gritty depths of underground pledging. It's a film that I wanted to do back in the 90s, and I was trying to conceive of how to tell this story, and it took me years to conceive of it because at that time we were shooting on film. And shooting on film, you're paying a lot of money for 10-minute reels and getting color corrections and development and all that. It was cost prohibitive. 1998, the famous, or now infamous, Blair Witch Project came out. And that changed the landscape for how storytelling happens in film. And I was immediately drawn to it. I said, wow, this little film is creative. It told a concept from looking back over this concept of people filming themselves. It kind of laid the foundation for reality shows. So I labored on the concept for years because it was still too expensive. And then along came the 2000s and the digital age. So I began in 2009 to actively work on the film and ended up shooting it in 2011. Shot it. It was an intense experiment. I modeled it on the world-famous Stanford's prison experience. And that happened in 1971. If you remember that, you know that history, Stanford University, Philip Zimbardo did something that some people think was insane, that the experiment went off the rails midway through. But he separated college students into prisoners and guards and locked the prisoners up voluntarily and began a psychological experience. And he began to see that average everyday students would begin to take over or take on the attitude, the actions, and the mentality of the oppressor and the oppressed. And it got to be so intense they had to stop this because they were beginning to abuse these kids, and the kids were accepting it. So I did something similar. I got a bunch of guys who had not been through the pledging process primarily and gave them a mythology and gave them a fraternity and basically took them through a pledging process that was unscripted, where they didn't know what was happening to them from time to time. And the result was 46 hours of footage that is the most gritty, accurate, realistic depiction of an underground pledging process ever captured on screen.
Wow.
That's been edited down to a 98-minute film that just premiered on Brother Robert Johnson's channel, the Urban Movie Network. So it's on the Urban Movie channel now, umc.tv. It premiered at the Nashville Film Festival in 2012. A lot of people saw it. I took it around the campuses and did not have a distribution deal because at the time Hollywood was asking the questions, well, who's in it? Do you have any stars? Is there a comedian in it? Black folks don't make found footage films. What are you doing? But it just so happens between 2012 and 2017 that people got used to this whole voyeuristic way of looking at life. And so 2017, 2018 became a point in time where the technology and the understanding of the storytelling has caught up to it. And so now we're getting a great response, and it's just been a great window. So yeah, I would say if your son's got a strong stomach and you're gonna be there with him, he should check that film out.
It has, with all of the attention on hazing of late in the past few years, and even with your film, is any of that subsiding at all, Jeff?
Actually, no, and that's what's interesting, Mark. When I made the movie, the thing that I like about He Ain't Heavy is I tell people when I travel around the country when they stream it or when they email me and say I saw this film, there's a pure quality to the storytelling that is unfortunate, but it's uninfluenced. So I say that to say that in August of 2011, we finished filming the film. In November, 4 months later of 2011, Robert Champion from FAMU died as a result of the hazing ritual. And then the whole hazing thing began. Everybody said, we want to do a film on hazing based on the champions. We want to talk about this story, and we want to, do some Hollywood depictions, and, let's get this going, and let's talk about how crazy things are. And I think it really did not give people a true understanding of what happens with situations like that. Hazing is not something that just pops up out of anywhere. It's what one of Dr. King called one of the tranquilizing drugs of gradualism. it starts as just fun stuff. It starts as a desire for us to belong.
Mm-hmm.
It starts as people who are in college, who are moving forward in the world, who are progressive, who are developing to be leaders like your grandfather. It starts like that in legacies, and so people want to be a part. But what happens in this modern culture, again, we tie it to the culture of violence. We began to push people further and further, and slowly, we began to spiral down into behavior that if we were removed from the college campus, we would say is worse than what some street gangs do. So this is something that we have to start looking at, especially as black people of African descent, but more especially as black men.
Yeah.
Because with what we're dealing with, we say, what is the thin line between wanting to belong and then damaging somebody for life? When I filmed the film, I had a couple of cats who were working with it who had pledged before, so we would talk. I kept the group separate so that they wouldn't have any interaction. And I said, here's the way we used to do it in the old school. And they said, oh, no, I know about that. We do that now. I said, what?
Wow.
And hazing, technically, I pledged Alpha Phi Alpha Fraternity Incorporated, Beta Omicron chapter, shout out to your granddad, in spring of 1987 at Tennessee State University. 1990, Joel Harris, thunderclap on the chest in Morehouse College. He dies. There's a ban on hazing and underground activities. I pledged during the time you could do some of this stuff legally. So I thought that at least it has subsided on some levels, but there's such an intense desire to be what they call made as opposed to, quote, paper, unquote, that people still will submit themselves to the depths of insanity just to belong, man. And that concept, that conversation belongs in a larger cultural context of where are we as a people with our set of morals and self-esteem, and what are we willing to submit ourselves in or to be a part of something larger. And He Ain't Heavy, Pleasant Underground, gives a realistic fly on the wall perspective of what that looks like.
Also, the Reverend Dr. Jeff Obafemi Carr, the film He Ain't Heavy, we'll let you know the website too, folks, before we go. Hazing, where does that come from? How did we start doing that? What is that history?
Well, the history is interesting because it depends on who you talk to. Most hazing experts, Dr. Ricky L. Jones is a great guy, University of Louisville, and a lot of experts like that. Hank Newer, who's one of the top hazing experts in America, who tracks that since 1970 there's been a death by hazing every year since 1970, which is unacceptable. But a lot of people trace it to the 60s and 70s when people returned to the college campus from the military. And the military culture came in, and they said, boot camp, we need to get ourselves in shape. We need to do some of these, rituals, not necessarily rituals, some of these rites and practices to get ourselves together. And the bonding rituals that came from military crept into the fraternity. What you'll find is you ask somebody who is older. In Nashville, we just celebrated the ancestral transition of Queen Mother Bernice Brunson. Mm-hmm. And Queen Mother Brunson was 102. And she made her way on out. She would have been 103 in April. Queen Mother Brunson is old school AKA. And she saw He Ain't Heavy back in 2012 in her 90s. And she came out of the movie and she pulled me to the side and she said, Jeff, when did we start doing that to each other? Mm-hmm. And I said, well, I don't know, Mother Brunson. She said, when I pledged, we didn't do this. Mm-hmm. We didn't do this to each other. And she was with an older gentleman who was in his 80s who was a captain. He said, we didn't do things like this to each other. How could you do something to somebody like that and call that your brother afterwards? And I said, okay. So there's obviously some space where things began to transition over. And when we look at our great brothers like Thurgood Marshall, we look at our great brothers in Alpha like Dr. Martin Luther King. They were the models that I had for joining.
Right.
But how much wood did Dr. King take?
Yeah.
Did he pass an egg from mouth to mouth? Did he stick his mouth in the toilet and drink toilet water? No. 9 times out of 10, these cats were not doing it during that era. So this has crept into the culture, and just like everything else, it becomes a part of the culture that we no longer question.
Yeah.
One of the chants that we have that the movie is named after is "He ain't heavy, he's my brother."
Mm-hmm.
And we say, and a lot of people are convinced that that's just a chant that fraternities have done since the beginning of time. But no, it came from the Holly song of the '60s, and then it came to the campuses because Donny Hathaway did a remake of it that was awesome. And obviously, somebody was in the underground session one day and was like, "Repeat after me," because I like this song. And when somebody infuses something into the culture, it can take root like that, just as violence has.
Yeah. Jeff Obafemi Carr, folks. What's the website for the film, too, Jeff?
Yeah, it's you can go to two sites and they direct you to the right place. It's heaintheavymovie.com. That's heaintheavymovie.com. No apostrophe in the ain't. And you can also go to, if you don't remember that, you can go to pledgethefrat.com. So pledgethefrat.com, and it'll direct you to the Urban Movie Channel. I got to say this, man, because this is we can't pass up this opportunity.
Okay.
When you're talking about Black history, when you're talking about Black empowerment, when you're talking about economic power, and you mentioned the bank that's supporting you, the commercial that we read while I was on hold.
Right.
When you talk about using the internet for power, there's no other. I'm glad that this movie took 5 years to get into digital distribution. We're still seeking theatrical distribution, but we're available online. I couldn't be more pleased that I'm a part of the first African-American streaming venture of its kind, of its scope. Bob Johnson, man, after he sold BET, he had this thirst and this desire to continue to be independent and to be free.
Mm-hmm.
This represents walking off the plantation, man. So he put his time, his effort, his money, his talents into the Urban Movie Channel.
Mm-hmm.
And he hired a sister from Tennessee State, Tracy Odie.
That's right.
Tracy Odie Blunt.
That's right.
And made her president, man. She's president of the Urban Movie Channel.
Yeah, she is.
So when you talk about a strong sister with a history in entertainment, RLJ Entertainment has stepped up and said, you know what? You got Netflix over there, but we got the Urban Movie Channel over here.
Mm-hmm.
And we're gaining on it.
Mm-hmm.
And that's, for me to be a part of the Urban Movie Channel and some of the other African-American filmmakers who are being given a voice now, it's an honor and a privilege. So you got the first found footage film, previously just been reserved for horror. You got the first African-American network that's online.
Mm-hmm.
Urban Movie Channel is available on Amazon, on Fire Stick. It's available on Android devices. I think the website is umc.tv. But it's good to know that I can be a part of a demonstration project, brother, that says we can do things ourselves. With the advent of the internet, there's a more equal playing field. So I'm encouraging everybody to see the film, but to also support UMC. And a shout out to Tracy Odie for being a role model for young girls out there everywhere.
That's right.
I've got 5 children. I got 2 boys. I got 3 girls. And when I'm able to look at a presentation of the show and say, hey, tell my little girls, hey, baby, y'all going to be executives. Here's a sister who's doing it.
Right.
And I went to school with her.
Outstanding.
You know, that's pretty awesome.
HeAintHeavyMovie.com. Folks, I'm afraid our time is up, but folks, check out the movie, especially if you've got young people who are thinking about pledging. Those of you who have pledged in the Divine Nine as well, check it out and maybe let us know what some of your experiences are. Whether you even experience this, reach out to Jeff. He's everywhere on Twitter at RevJOC, and he's on Facebook. My brother, I wish we had more time, but thank you for sharing this with us, man. And I'll hook up with you when I get to Nashville next week. Okay.
Absolutely. We'll roll out the welcome wagon. Keep holding up the light, brother.
All right, brother. Thank you so much, Jeff. Take care. Hotep.
Hotep, brother. We'll talk soon.